I'm going to go over this. So remember, the first thing when you look at your paper, especially for this little mini unit we're doing, the first thing you should put is like Dr. XY, right? So D goes with X and R goes with Y. Sometimes it may sound simple, but sometimes when you learn so many things in Algebra 1, we're going to forget that domain means X and ranges are Y. So when we're looking at domain, and you guys can still use the highlighters, I actually encourage it. If I'm looking at domain, I'm looking at the X value, which is side to side, right? And so I'm looking at the furthest left it goes to the furthest right it goes. Now, when you're writing this as an interval or an inequality, some of you just got it wrong because the smallest number needs to go first. And so when I'm writing this right here, I can see my smallest X value is -4. And since it's touching it, because it has there's a dot on it that's filled in, I would start with -4. If you are doing your intervals, it would have a bracket because it touches -4. Then if I'm talking about my domain, what letter is your domain? X, right? So there should be an X right here. Right here, you don't need the X. And then, what's the biggest X there? 1. And so since it touches 1 because it's filled in, I'll put a 1 right there. And then right here, if you're doing the brackets, it looks something like that. It doesn't matter what you can use brackets or intervals, but remember your interim and different things are multiple choice. And so you want to make sure that you know that those two things, you may see this as an answer choice, you may see that as an answer choice. You need to know that they mean the same thing. But when I'm asking you to do it, you can do whichever one you want. Does that make sense? So make sure, some of you guys had 1, -4. Just make sure you always start with the smallest value, because it says X is greater than or equal to -4, but less than or equal to 1. Does that make sense for the domain? Okay. For the range, that would be up and down. And so I would do the smallest to the highest, the shortest to the highest. And since it touches it, I know it would be the same brackets and inequality that's equal to. So right here, I'm going to put it right here. I know I'm talking about Y, and I know they're both touching, so it's going to look something like this. I can also do brackets because I know it's touching. What's the smallest Y value there is? -2. And so some people were still looking at the X values when you were answering this. Make sure you're always looking at the Y values. The largest Y value is 1. And so those would be your two answers. This is the same question that was on your check for understanding. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The next one is a parabola right here. So I would do the same exact thing and get my highlighter and start with domain. And my domain is side to side, right? But you can see now it's an open circle. So instead of brackets, what are you going to be using? Parentheses. So some of you guys used parentheses in the last one. Make sure it would be brackets because it's touching it. It has a filled in circle. And so the smallest one is -2. The largest X is 2. You can also write it so it looks like this. Remember, there's no line because it's an open circle. All those inequality things are also going to be on your interim. I don't see what your interim looks like, remember, because I don't see what your interim looks like because Gwinnett gives that to you, but I know the standards. I know these standards. The next one is your range. So if I highlight it, and I highlight the lowest to the highest, you can see the lowest Y value is what? What's the lowest Y value? 0, right? And so since it touches it, it would look something like that. I also would know 0 would go like this because it touches it. But when we look at the top one, see how they're both open circles? It never touches that line. I know that it would be a parentheses and an inequality without the line. What's the highest Y there is? 4. So it looks something like that. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. remember that linear equations are the main thing we learned. When there's arrows in both directions, what would the domain and range be? If it's going on forever and ever and ever. Infinity to negative infinity, we also call that all real numbers. So if it's ever a line that's just arrows at the end, you know that it's infinity to negative. Okay, so we're going to get started with our notes for today. So now we're doing domain and range through word problems. And so if you were good with like that per, each, every from last unit, then this should be a piece of paper. So if you guys need a glue stick, if you want to glue it in first, last, I'll pass out these that have glue sticks in them. Yes. Thank you. Everyone has this little paper. Does anyone need this little paper? And if you want a color code too, here's the color pens with that. All right, so this question says, Isaiah sells shoes at a local shoe store nearby. He gets a base salary per day of $50 plus $5 for each pair of shoes he sells. So first thing we want to know is what is our initial value? What's our beginning value or our y-intercept? The $50, right? So it's the base salary of $50 is my y-intercept. So right here, I would write the base salary of $50 because it's your initial or your beginning amount. And we know that this is our y-intercept. So basically plugging it into this equation. Then we know our slope. What words do we know indicate the number before it is our slope? Per, what else? Each, every. So where do we see that here? For each pair of shoes, right? So the $5 would be considered your slope. So it's $5 per or for each. And what does your X stand for? Per what? Each pair of shoes. In the end, what is Isaiah getting out of this? Is he getting brain bucks? Is he getting food? What's he getting out of this situation of working? Money, right? So the Y would be your total money. And we know that N would be our slope. And what did we learn yesterday? X was. What does X represent that we learned yesterday? Domain. And what does Y represent? Range. And so today we haven't looked at the X and Y values, but we want to make sure we know how to interpret what's going on and what our domain is and what our range is from these word problems. So whatever's after per, each, every, that's usually your domain. Range is always your total something. We're actually going to go back, if you could see what we're going to be doing today in that little practice sheet. You can see we're going to be going back to where we learned rational and irrational numbers and figure out what could be my domain in this situation and what could be my range. So pair of shoes, when we think of that, can I buy like a 15th of a pair of shoes? Can I buy a fraction of a pair of shoes? No, right? Can I buy negative pairs of shoes? No. Can I buy 0 shoes? I can buy 0 shoes. Can I buy 10 shoes? Right. So we know that this can be whole numbers. Remember, whole numbers, and we'll go over this in a second, are numbers that start with 0 and work their way up. So 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Those are whole numbers we you learned that at the beginning, but in case you forgot. We also have integers. Remember, integers mean they could be positive or negative. But can I get a negative pair of shoes? No, so I can only have positive integers. These are all examples of things that can qualify as my domain. I couldn't have rational numbers because remember, rational means it can be turned into a fraction. So I can't buy 0.25 pair of shoes. That doesn't make sense. They don't sell. Now the range is money. Can I have a decimal in money?
Yes.
I can, right? I could have $1.25. So I can, right here, have positive rational numbers. I can't make negative money in this situation. I could also have whole numbers. I can make $0. You could also have positive integers. And so basically we're kind of just breaking down what's our slope, our y-intercept, and figuring out what would be our domain and range. And then it will be like if you look at the back of the sheet that I gave you for today, you guys can see these are the type of questions that they ask on your SAT, ACT, milestone. It's all going to be multiple choice where they give you a situation and say, what could the domain be? So you won't really have to come up with these on your own. Okay, so we're going to go to this part of it right here. So this is the beginning of this worksheet. I'm going to do 2 problems with you and then go over. So this top sheet says, Clarissa received $15 iTunes gift card to download music from her iPod. Each song costs $3. And so the first thing you want to look at is discrete or continuous. Continuous would mean I can have a fraction of a song. It means that it can include all rational numbers. Can I download a fraction of a song? Can I download 1 song, 2 songs, 3 songs? That's what discrete means. So in this situation, it would be discrete. So discrete means whole numbers. Then what is the domain? So we know, who can raise their hand and tell me what's the slope here in this situation? For them. $3, right? In this case, actually, because we're starting with a gift card, and each song costs $3, would I be adding 3 or subtracting 3? Subtracting 3 for each song, right? So I'm starting out with a total money, which would be my y-intercept. I think I used red in the last one. So this would be my initial value, my B, my beginning value. Then after each song, I'm spending $3. So it would actually be a -3. It's $3 per what? Song. So I know that my domain would be the song. What would your range be? What is she dealing with here? What is she using to buy the songs? Money. And so your range would be money. And so the first thing it says, write the domain or set of all possible x values. So the domain would be our songs, right? Now, how many songs can she buy? They're each $3, and she has a $15 card. 5 songs total, right? So she can buy 0 songs, 1 song, 2 songs, 3 songs, 4 songs, and 5 songs. All those could be my domain. She can't buy 1/4 of a song, right? iTunes doesn't allow you to say, hey, you can download, you can pay a little less and get 75% of this song. They don't do it. So my songs would be these right here. What do we call from when it goes 0 and it's whole number for, when it starts at 0 and it counts whole numbers, we know that whole numbers, if that was an answer choice, would be a correct answer for domain. The range, the set of y values, what's our range again? Money, right? So we have total money left on the card. So She starts with how much money? 15. What if she buys one song? 12. What if she buys another song? 9. What about another song? What about another song?
3.
And no songs? Or buys another song, she spent all her money, it'd be 0. So those are all the possible ranges that I could have. Could Jillian purchase 14 songs? No, why not? Would she run out of money or would she still have money on that card? She would run out of money. She would need to buy a whole nother gift card. So that's one type of domain and range question you would see. Another one is this next one. Deja is driving 40 miles per hour. Her trip is a total of 160 miles. So who can raise their hand and tell me what's the initial amount? What is she starting at? If we're looking at like where she's starting, if she didn't even get in her car yet, how many miles away is she? She's 160 miles away, but she's at mile 0, right? So she's starting at mile 0, and she's going to mile what? 160. And so it's miles per hour. So what would be your domain? So 40 miles, that would be my slope, right? That would be my slope. Per what? Hour. So hour would actually be your domain. And so when we're looking at domain, if she didn't even start driving yet, what's the smallest amount of hours that, or where does she start hour what? 0. So that she starts at hour 0. If she's driving 160 miles and going 40 miles per hour, how many hours is it going to take her to get there? 4, right? So the largest amount of hours is 4. To write this, and this is continuous because I can drive for a third of an hour, right? So this could actually be fractions. And so I would write this as 0, go from 0 to 4 hours. Does everyone get why hours is your domain and not miles? Because it's like after per, whatever's after per, each, every is your domain. Then the range is your total what? What is he doing here? Total driving, total miles, right? So what's the smallest amount of miles he can have? We already did it up there. 0. Largest, 160. And so my range would be 0. And so on the milestone in the past, they'll have a question like this and say, what would the domain be? And it would be something like these answer choices, and you would need to figure out, okay, what's the domain? What is the smallest amount and biggest amount of the domain in this situation? And so which one's my answer? Perfect. Last thing I'm going over for today before you do those practice problems is kind of reviewing the whole numbers, natural numbers, things like that right here. You should already have this in your notebook if you started with me. So if you want to just turn to it, you can in your survival guide. It was one of the first units. But if you don't, that's fine too. You can write it right here. So the first one is natural, or it's called counting numbers. So remember, if I told you to start counting, what would you naturally start doing? What would you start with? 1, 2, 3, etc. Right? So natural numbers or counting numbers start with 1 and work their way up. 1, 2, 3. Whole numbers, I remember whole because what letter does whole include?
0.
0. And so I know there are all these counting numbers, but it also includes 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Those are all whole numbers. Integers includes positive numbers, so it includes like 4, 5, 6. But it also includes negative numbers, like -1, -2, -3. So integers are positive and negative. Rational numbers include all these, so this, it's a circle like this because it includes everything inside, but it also includes decimals and fractions, so like 1/2, -2/3, -0.25, and terminating decimals. Remember, terminating means they end. It also could be not, or perfect squares, so square root of 16. And so rational numbers can be written as a fraction, including decimals. Here, whole numbers start with 0 and work their way up. Irrational numbers are numbers when you put them in the calculator, remember they're non-terminating decimals. They go on forever and ever and ever. Or non-perfect squares. They cannot be written as a fraction. So for example, like square root of 3, if you put that into your calculator, it would give you a long, non-terminating decimal. If you had like a decimal that went on forever and it didn't repeat and it didn't really have any sort of pattern, that's irrational. Even if it's a fraction, but it has an irrational number in it, like radical 3, it's irrational. We also have pi. Real numbers, like when we do that graph and we say all real numbers, we just mean that includes all rational and irrational. So all of these numbers are included in infinity and negative. So now what you guys are going to do is on the back are different problems where they ask for the domain and range and what it could be. You're going to try those on your own, and you could come up here and stamp them too. I have the answer key right here. When you're finished, especially if you didn't do well on that quiz from yesterday, there's little green papers around the room. And so what you're going to be doing is just asking for the domain and range of each one. You don't need to say if it's a function yet because we'll do that tomorrow. So when you're finished, you can get stamps for that as well. And every 4 you get a brain buck. So you can cash it in for candy and things like that. Sound good? Cool. Let me stop this recording.